My name is Alina Adams. I was born in Odessa, USSR. I wrote 3 books set in the Soviet Union. My daughter was born in America. I'm going to tell her about the Soviet experience through books. We're back. It's a new season, and our first book will be Mother Doll by Katya Apekina. Now, when we started this, you said to me, "What's this book about?" And I said, "I'm not going to tell you because I want to get your first initial spontaneous reaction." So at the beginning of Mother Doll, a woman, a little older than you, gets a phone call from a man who says, "I'm a psychic. Your great-grandmother wants to talk to you." What would your reaction be if that happened?
I feel like I'd be you, but like with the scammers, but with the psychic, and like try to stay on the line as long and be like trying to find out all the tea about what he thinks is.
So you wouldn't think it was real?
No.
But on the other hand, if he was able to prove to you that it was real, would you want to talk to your great-grandmother? Now, you had 2. Well, actually, I assume you had 4. I'm actually trying to do the math. How many great-grandmothers do you have? If you have 4 grandparents, you must have... You actually have 4 very interesting great-grandmothers. Would you, if you believed it was real, would you want to talk to them?
They're the ones I'm more like, right?
Well, some of them, yeah.
Yeah, I would, because, you see, I think that some of my personality traits really skipped a generation. And I would love...
And that's a wonderful thing. That's a good thing. You're very lucky.
And I'd love to talk to the ones before and be like... Because I feel like it'd be more like, you get me, I get you, even though it's like huge generation, different time periods.
So here's something very interesting. You're 18. I know that's still something she's processing, but you're 18, and your great-grandmothers all actually lived to relatively healthy old ages. But here's a really interesting concept in Mother Doll, which I've actually never encountered, so I wanted to talk about this. The suggestion is when you speak to a soul or a ghost or whatever you want to call it, there's not just one of the person who lived their entire lifetime. In Mother Doll, she posits that every part of your life you were a different person, and that's a different soul. Like the great-grandmother that speaks to her is actually the young teenage girl who lived through the Soviet Revolution and has confessions to make. And she points out that she's not the older woman who, for instance, abandoned her grandmother in an orphanage, and she's not the much older woman who ended up moving to America, that those are different people in a way. So what do you think of the concept that you're not just one person throughout your lifetime, but you're many, many different people? And if that's the case, which great-grandmother version age would you want to talk to?
Oh, okay, 2-part question. First, I really do like that concept. I feel like if I asked like 10-year-old me, 14-year-old me, and those aren't that big and that's only 4 years like apart, I would get completely different answers if I asked for like advice or something, right? So I definitely think the different ghosts is a cool concept because like you might remember your great-grandparents like earlier, like when near the end of their lives. But you don't know what they're like when they're younger, and that's something you might be able to relate to more. So I do think that's a cool concept.
It is. I liked it a lot. That's why I wanted to highlight it here. But the question is, as an 18-year-old, do you want to get advice from an 18-year-old, or would you rather get advice from someone older?
I want to say like 25 because I feel like the advice as you get older it gets better, but also you get more out of like touch with what it was actually like realistic advice. You know what I mean? Like it becomes more idealistic because you're like, well, if I had gone back, I would have done that. But it's like, but you can't, you know? So I feel like 25 is a good gap.
The cerebral cortex is all mature, but you're not old and boring.
Exactly.
One of the things the dead great-grandmother says to the heroine of Mother Doll is, "My story would put your suffering into perspective." So I see you're already laughing. What does that phrase mean to you, young person born in America?
So every time that I complain about like a small problem, and then you're like, oh, wow, that's such a big problem, like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, but isn't the whole reason that, like, the generations before me suffered was so that I wouldn't have to suffer?
We did it all for you.
Exactly. So, really, me having a first world problem is, like, a compliment to you.
Ah, and to your grandparents.
Exactly.
And to your great-grandparents. So really, every time you complain, it's you saying, "Thank you, Mother, for allowing me to be born in America." But here's the other thing. Is that we've read a couple of books. We've read books by Maria Kuznetsova, we've read books by Irina Rain, we've read books by Lara Wapner, which all have this multi-generational structure. And here's what I found to be sort of an interesting thread, and I saw it in Mother Doll too. the character, the narrative character, the narrator character, the American character, is kind of a loser. They're kind of at loose ends. They don't know who they want to be when they grow up, even if they're grown-ups. Their first world problems are overwhelming them to the point where they're paralyzed and can't think of what to do. It wasn't actually until I read Mother Doll that I thought of this particular trend. Why do you think authors of my generation, and all of these are authors who were born in the former Soviet Union and then came to the US, when they write these stories, they make the narrator character, and I have a bit of that in the Nesting Dolls too, not so much in My Mother's Secret or in Go On Pretending, but up to a certain point. Why do you think this is about us, why do you think we are writing these stories where we have the older characters, the previous generations who were, no matter what happened to them, were focused and knew what to do, and we're kind of flailing about? Losers may be a strong term, but there's definitely a difference between the previous generation and this one. So what are we working through? I know your generation loves to do TikTok analysis. So tell me, what are we working through?
I feel like it has to do with like choice. I feel like a lot of like the older characters in the story didn't have as many choices to continue to survive, right? But I feel like the younger characters, they only have choices, and like that's the point. Like the older generations went through these struggles so that the younger generations could have these choices. But then it shows that like at the end there's a lot of choices. Now they don't know what to do because they don't have such a strict and narrow path that they have to follow.
Because my suffering will put your story to shame. So if you want advice, or you don't want advice, or you're wondering what you would do if a psychic called you and said your great grandmother wants to talk to you, the book to read, Mother Doll.